Welcome to Cora the podcast. Today's going to be a little bit different. You might notice a slightly softer dress code for me at this end. It's more sort of, it's pitched towards being more sort of university lecturer. I've lost the beard as well, which is a little bit unfortunate, but no more of that because it will make me sad. The idea with the podcast, we decided that actually the news was a little bit depressing, wasn't it, Kaylee?
It was a little bit depressing, a little bit circular. We were getting the same issues popping up again and again. And yeah, it was no longer bringing us joy.
Yeah, and actually we figured that there should be a little bit more joy in education generally, and that includes educational podcasts. So we've decided to move things around a little bit. We're going to sort of head towards research focus, thought leadership, some new ideas and some exciting ideas, and try to ask some of the big questions. And actually this was inspired by Amal Rajan, who you may have come across as the host of University Challenge's newsreader, and generally all-round sort of intellectual good guy, I would probably say. And I listened to several of his podcasts under the title Radical with Amal Rajan that are available on the BBC. I'm just going to share the screen so you can actually see it. Yeah, so this is the chap here now. And the radical appeal to the sort of clandestine revolutionary that I think both of us harbour inside of us. Would that be fair, Kaylee?
I'm not even sure mine's particularly clandestine.
Yes, mine's probably a little more hidden than yours. That would be fair. I think that's age that does that to you, kind of just tires you out and grinds it out of you a little bit. But it's good to see that you've still got fire in your belly and that we have a firebrand on the staff.
I don't know about that, but yes, no, this definitely speaks to something quite deep within my psyche, my pedagogy.
Yeah, well, listen, welcome to the new brand of podcast with Koru. And we're going to be talking about his podcast with Louisa Munch. Amal Rajan actually does far longer podcasts than we do. It was 62 minutes, but it's definitely worth all 62 minutes and then some, to be honest. Now, this one was all about why a university education should be free. And in this current world, that's quite a controversial question because university educations are rarely free. And I'm an economist. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Someone pays. It's just a question of who. I'm getting some eye rolls already from Kaylee on the other end of this call. This is going to be great. This podcast. So, Louisa Munch is a really fascinating lady. Terribly well qualified, sort of brought up from her bootstraps, as it were, sort of solid working class background. You can tell by listening to her accent. There's a real sort of raggedness to her and a reality to her, sort of in the style of Angela Rayner, perhaps. If maybe you know her, that kind of determined, successful but working class person.
Yeah.
Did you think about Louisa Munch and this podcast with Amal Rajan and Kaylee?
I mean, I thought it was great. It was exactly my kind of. I mean, critical theory.
I knew it would be.
Critical theory is very much attractive to me. I feel like I'm lucky to have been brought up in a house where the idea of critiquing what is going on is quite normal. Over the dinner table, everybody holds an opinion and is critiqued for such. It can make Christmas dinner a little uncomfortable sometimes. But it was something that was very, very, very important. And so this idea of being able to critique what is happening, critique power, critique government, critique your own decision making, and this idea of having a first thought, and then critiquing that, and so maybe having a second and a third, and maybe you don't always let the first thought out. I don't know. I thought this podcast was excellent.
For those that are listening that are thinking, well, okay, I'm aware of the concept of critical theory, but what actually is it? It's probably worth pinning down, and it's that idea that we kind of question everything with a view to building a better world, particularly orthodox thinking, because with orthodox thinking you end up with kind of groupthink. And I think within education this is particularly pertinent because teachers are so busy, they rarely get time to think about the big stuff. And when they do get that time to think about the big stuff, a lot of them are so tired that, well, what difference is it going to make? So I kind of won't bother. And that's not to denigrate teachers particularly. That's just to say that the workload in the system doesn't necessarily facilitate that opportunity for critical theory. In the same way that you said that, at the dinner table, you had the chance to do that as a youngster. I was brought up with very similar ideas, but my mother and my grandmother, particularly, were the ones that were open to that critique and that questioning. My father and my older brothers far less open to any kind of critical theory, and it's not always made for an easy relationship, if the truth be told.
No, for sure. And there are lots of family members and friends out there who have not been on the other end of my critique. That wouldn't be fair, but we have discussed our politics, our core beliefs, the deep stuff, not just the weather and what you had for lunch this morning, or this afternoon, in this case, maybe. And so I think, the reason why I really enjoyed listening to this podcast is because Louisa Munch talks in depth about how specifically a university education, but I'm taking it more broadly. Education is one of the few places and one of the few tools that we have in order to engage critically with the world around us.
There's a philosophical question in there in and of itself, that if we don't engage critically, then we're always working to someone else's agenda. And that might be quite convenient. It might lift some of that cognitive load from us from time to time, but it does open the door to tyranny. And history's taught us that. History, the present, potentially, has taught us that for sure. So let's get back to that key question. Should education, university education in this respect, should it be free, and why not?
I mean, from my perspective, yes, absolutely it should be, and from Louisa's too, because at the core of education, as to what speaks to what is education for, we're talking about education being society's main tool for fairness. And so in her podcast, she talks a lot about, meritocracy and how we are not currently living in a society where things are equal enough for meritocracy. That idea that if you work hard, you will get higher based on your merit. At the moment, the way that education is kind of built and what's happening to it, it's not enabling our society to be fair. And because it's not fair, we then take out some of the other main reasons for education. We want education because we want to enable people to participate in society. Right? Well, if we take away free education, we're not allowing equal opportunity, and therefore we're not getting everyone able to actively participate democratically, to understand the rights, responsibilities, and power, to work productively, all these things.
I think there's a really interesting point in here that we often miss, because we often talk about it in terms of the individual's interests, their ability to sort of be socially mobile, to go from living a life where they weren't economically viable into something where they are and they contribute to society. I think we missed the point in this totally, though. The discussion for me is in society's loss of human capital in that process of preventing access to education. And there are undoubtedly talented youngsters in the world that cannot afford to go to university at the moment. And those talented individuals could go on and do great, amazing things. And, you know, there's the classic example of discovering a cure for a particular illness, but there's no end of things that they could do as talented individuals. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering sort of cures for COVID or things like that. Just being a really, really good teacher, I say just, being a really, really good teacher, changing lives for the better by virtue of what you're able to do. And I think society loses that human capital by not granting that kind of universal access to education. The thing that came across to me with Louisa Munch's interview was she was almost sort of willfully ignorant of the debt that she was in. It was like, I've just parked that. I'm not interested in that because this is what I wanted to do.
I don't know whether it's a case of disinterest, because I think she's aware there is something higher that she's kind of aiming towards, and it really spoke to me, because I was one of the last years where I paid my student fees, and I got a grant, but it was not to the extent. There's just a few years in between her and me. And if I was, you know, born 5 years younger, I wouldn't have been able to go to university. I wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have been possible. You know, it wouldn't have been financially viable. And what a shame! What an absolute shame! Because, you know, being at university, being able to be a good teacher afterwards, but also having that experience of being able to critique things, being able to learn, being independent, all those things that all those soft and, you know, hard skills that I picked up, I wouldn't have had. So I know that I was very lucky, and it is a crying shame that it is not possible for our students now.
I think if we can maybe sort of jump beyond just the economic implications of education, because I think we get drawn up in this, and it offends me greatly that we see education as purely an economic vehicle. Now, I'm an economics teacher by trade, but actually, you've touched on a few points within that, and Louisa Munch does too. The idea that education is just about opening the mind. Now, there are people that I know that would say quite openly, candidly, and possibly very assertively that, you know, if you want to go and study engineering, that should be paid for, because engineering adds something to the world and allows us to build things and makes us really better off. But if you want to go and study art history, then that's an indulgence, so you should pay for it. Now, I knew that was coming when I was to be honest with you, I'm surprised you haven't sworn just yet. That's not my opinion, but it is an opinion that has been voiced by someone relatively close to me on more than one occasion, and it's caused some problems with that relationship from time to time. Where do you stand on the purpose of education?
One of the purposes of education is to develop human potential, right? If you are curious and creative in a field, you should be able to have the access to fulfill that. It comes from, Chris and I have spoken about this before. There is a poet called Mary Oliver who talks about your one wild and precious life. This is something that credit goes to my husband, because he ran through the house with this particular poem to tell me about this beautiful phrase, and it's something that we bring up often.
You can't have been married that long if he's coming home and citing poetry to you, Kaylee.
I mean, 10 years this year.
Well, there we go. 10 years in, he's coming home with poetry for you. You're blessed.
I am extremely blessed, so shout out to Pat. But no, I think there is the economics. We have to be rational. I know it. You know, that's my, one of my sides is you have to be, logical, rational. But the other side is that, human potential is so vast. And, what would have happened if Hitler had got into art school? He wanted to go. He painted. What would have happened if they'd let him in? Whoa! Just throwing that out there. There is a reason why Mr. Trump, who I'm going to speak deferentially to because I might need to go and visit my family at some point this year.
You still need a visa.
I still might need an ESTA. There's a reason why he loves the uneducated. There is a reason for that. And not just the uneducated because they didn't go to art school. You know, there is so much out there. We live in such an amazing world that it doesn't matter whether you want to study art or whether you want to study engineering. Granted, economically we need doctors, but at the moment we're also not allowing them the opportunity.
But if we don't have art, what are we doing it for?
Right.
You know, I'm minded of, I think it was Dead Poets Society. You know, that engineering and medicine are noble professions. They sustain life. But you know, art, poetry, and love, that's the reason that we're alive.
I think two things can be true at once, right? We need all. We need everything. We need it and we want it, and we should be able to access it. And not just because, you know, you have you know, parents and families who are able to gift that to you. Yeah, and it is a beautiful thing to be able to do, but it needs to be bigger.
Yeah, and I do like I like the fact that Louisa Munch has gone through and done what she's done and become a professor and things like that, and she has this media presence.
Oh, yeah.
What I got from the interview was an element of belligerence, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
That she was going to do this regardless, and she would find a way, and even if the money doesn't work. But she did admit that she was unlikely to ever be a homeowner and things like that. You know, some of those things that are part of that social contract. And the question was asked about whether student debt was actually worth it. And in truth, I've got kids that are some way from that yet. But I'd have to kind of question what the value was to them of going to university if they're going to dig themselves into debt.
Yep.
You could spend a fraction of the money and just buy the books that you want to read and read them.
But it's not just about reading the books, is it?
No.
We know it's about being part of the community and being challenged by your lecturers to think differently, to form opinions, and to hold those and to change them. It is, and that's something that she said that I actually really enjoyed. The fact that she was like, you know, when I hear something, because I can weigh different opinions, I can change my mind and justify it. Yeah. I'm not stuck. And I loved that.
Yeah, I think that ties in really squarely with that notion of curiosity. And I was talking about this with a good friend of mine on his live event last week, Shane Leaning, Education Leaders. Definitely worth a listen. It's almost as good as this podcast. And we were talking about some of the anxieties that school leaders face about uncertainty, but actually the flip side of that is curiosity for me. And I think that curiosity is something that we don't have enough of in schools because we're so busy trying to deliver content. We're so busy trying to meet the sort of criteria of the exam boards and things like that, that we quite often don't give curiosity the space it deserves in the academic curriculum. And actually, maybe if we all had a little bit more curiosity and a little less compliance, we might actually be getting a little bit further as a society.
It's an interesting thought. Huh?
There we go. And I think we were going to talk a little bit about, because I think Louisa Munch talked much about Margaret Thatcher, who is someone that has been mentioned by you from time to time in the past. And she, you know, it's interesting that she mentioned that and the pressure that kind of whole philosophy from Margaret Thatcher, us being worker bees, being members of society, not necessarily indulging in some of those things that we've mentioned just for the sake of indulging in them. And I'm kind of curious as to whether you feel that the UK has shaped up in such a way as to grant people that indulgence, or does it see us all as worker bees these days?
Well, I think this is part of like I have many problems with some of Margaret Thatcher's ideas, because there was this idea of the British work ethic and that kind of idea of bees you just brought up. And then on the other side, there is the no such thing as society, where you can't have worker bees without, they don't live in a vacuum. They live in a society. And so, yes, I did go off, and after the podcast, I went on a social media rampage and watched many videos on Instagram. And then I followed it up with some of Louisa Munch's written articles. And she wrote, one about, Thatcher didn't change the shape of Britain, but the heart and soul of the British people. I think we can link that in the links underneath the podcast. And another one about, Nigel Farage. Both very interesting. Both talking about placing the philosophies of these people in time. So thinking about post-war economics, how that had brought about NHS and social housing and blah blah blah, and then how Thatcher's economics switched that. And that was one of the things that I loved. It was basing people and their theories in the context of how it was happening, because that's how we learn, because we can then make some links as to what's happening now.
The whole thing about Nigel Farage troubles me greatly, and I think this is reason enough to make critical theory a part of the curriculum from age 4 years and upwards, basically, and goes double if you're an adult. You should have to pass an exam in critical theory to be allowed to vote. And I see the stuff that Nigel Farage spouts and says, and it has no resemblance in truth, but it's a simple message that sells. And simplicity does appeal to people when they're not prepared to question what's behind it. And politics, Nigel Farage's politics to one side, I find it abhorrent at the fact that he just lies to people, and the things he says are appealing but untrue very often.
There's a lot of that going around in international politics,
which you can mention clearly.
Which I cannot mention, but I would love to bring up a piece of beautiful fiction, which I feel holds right now in kind of time, which is this idea of 1984. When the party tells you to ignore what you hear with your ears and see with your eyes. Aha. So no, we don't need to go further down. This is an educational podcast. We've kind of gone deep into politics.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting back to this idea of what is education for, I think is really key, and really something that not just leaders of government should be looking at, but also everybody in society, because it has clear kind of moral and societal reasons why we have education, why universal education was established. And I'm not sure that right now we're fulfilling those.
No, I think as well that our education system focuses on content and delivery and knowledge, and it doesn't have enough of that creativity. I even find myself, I'm working with a group of students at the moment in preparation for some economics exams in the summer, and I find myself driving them towards a sort of exam technique, sort of filtering bits and pieces out of some of their work that has merit but doesn't have a place in an exam answer. And I'm minded that I'm actually becoming part of that problem, in the sense that I wouldn't say I'm crushing creativity out of the students, but I'm suppressing that. And I think our whole system drives that forward, and it does suppress that. You just need to read the stuff from Ken Robinson about creativity in schools and things like that, to know that our system doesn't really give us the time or the space. The best lessons I've ever had in my teaching career have been those that have been largely unscripted, that have maybe had very little planning that have gone into them, just some very low-key resources, and the kids have carried it forward with their questions and their discussion and ideas. And you know, some of those ideas that you get are absurd.
Mm-hmm.
They're valuable nevertheless. Some of those ideas are amazing
Yeah.
and make you question your own perspective and your own orthodox. And I think that we probably spend too much time speaking to youth and not enough time listening.
Yeah, and I think that comes back. So one of the key tenets of her podcast was talking about, meritocracy, and currently we don't have one. It is not a thing. And one of the things that irks me ever so slightly sometimes about critical theory is that often there is a critique without an actionable point after. But I think within education and this idea of trying to make it more meritocratic,
Mm-hmm.
that's the right word. I've had a lot of coffee. There are some actionable points that we can change, and one of those links to the exams, right? At the moment, we measure schools by outcome. We measure people by raw outcome, but not by equity. We're incentivized to select talent and to teach to the exam, and schools aren't rewarded necessarily for closing the gap, retaining disadvantaged students, supporting SEND.
Or just making a child feel good on any given day, making a child feel better by the time they go home. What could be more valuable than that? And yet that's one of those things that we never see. And you know, we get measured on a lot of things. I've got many ideas about our inspection and accountability framework in the UK particularly. And it's not so much that I have a problem with it per se, although I do. It's more the fact that it's such a missed opportunity. We could have such a developmental arrangement if we were to build space and time and expertise into that, rather than just this kind of accountability model that beats schools when they're struggling, or maybe doesn't see the more subtle things that they're doing that detract from the more obvious measurable metrics that they might want to see. So yeah, I think there's probably room for to be free.
Yeah,
and I think that should be regardless of whether you're doing the history of art, ethnic leather craft, or engineering and whatever. I don't care what it is. If that's your chosen field of study,
for sure. And expand it past university too. I mean, we shouldn't be having at this day and age, we shouldn't be having unpaid internships. That should not be a thing. It should not be a thing. We should be, making any educational gains real opportunities for people. We should be creating second chances, flexible pathways, so that merit can emerge over time, not just at 16 or 18, or just when they, we have that opportunity to go to university. We need to extend that. There's so much more we can do to bring out the best in everyone.
And for society's best interest. Amol Rajan, radical. If you're a clandestine or not so clandestine revolutionary, then potentially that podcast series is definitely worth a look. Anything by Louisa Munch is definitely worth a read. It might make you feel a little bit kind of angry, like a fire in your belly, or perhaps make you rethink some of the things that you're doing in your sort of teaching work. So, Kaylee, we could talk for hours again, but we mustn't do that. We need to keep things snappy. We haven't got 62 minutes like Amol Rajan had. But it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I love listening to your perspective in the world. And you know what I kind of think about this? I kind of wish we talked a little bit more when we both worked in Italy, but we were busy. We were locked in. We didn't have that time to lift our heads above the parapet because we were too busy delivering content, getting through the admin, blah, 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 blah. And actually, this is the kind of conversation that we should have been having on a sort of daily basis at school. So if you do that at school, folks, indulge yourself, talk to a colleague, ask them questions, critique their theories.
Do it. I would love to. I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. Thanks, Kaylee. A real pleasure.
Thank you.
See you now. Bye bye.